Well, welcome everybody to the June installation of the University of Idaho, Utah State University, and South Dakota State University Extension Sheep and Goat webinar that we do on a monthly basis. I'm Melinda Ellison. I'm the sheep specialist for the University of Idaho, and my other co-hosts are Chad Page, who is a sheep and goat specialist with Utah State, Carmen Wilmore, who works with University of Idaho as well, and also Jalen Whaley, who is a area sheep specialist for South Dakota State University. So we welcome you back to another edition of this webinar. So without any further ado, our guest speaker this month is J.J. Jones, who is an area ag economist with Oklahoma State University, and he's graciously here to talk to us today about the goat industry, give us an update and an outlook about the market and various other things. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to you. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will let you have the floor.
All right. Well, thanks, Melinda. Thanks, Chad. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you. I really, truly enjoy doing this kind of thing. It's, again, if you'd asked me 30 years ago when I got started into extension, if I'd be doing this, I'd be told, no, you're nuts. I'm never going to touch goats. But it didn't work out that way. And so I've been doing this kind of goat work probably the last 15 plus years, and I find it pretty interesting. And again, Melinda, if they got questions, just ask me right away. That way I don't forget what I say as I go along. So we'll just answer as we go along. We'll be real informal on this thing. I'm not a formal speaker by any means. And so we'll kind of get started. I will kind of start off by telling everybody, I said, since you mentioned I am from Oklahoma, and so a lot of my data, a lot of my work is out of the Oklahoma, Texas area. I try to relate back to the area that I'm talking to, but to be quite honest, the goat price information, once you get away from the major goat areas, is pretty spotty. I was telling Chad before we got started, I was looking for an Idaho market to kind of compare to, and USDA had none of them, no reports. And so I had to go off like Montana and places like that. So I've got a little idea of what y'all are experiencing out there. Best I can tell you, you're pretty close to what we're getting here. You might be 20 cents off some of the prices here, but I think what I'm going to talk about today is going to be relevant and to anybody who's listening and in the goat business. But again, if you got any questions, just ask me, and I'll try to, if I don't know the answer, I'll try to make one up and make it sound like I know what I'm talking about. So before I really get started, I'm going to start with some general conditions. When we talk about outlook of different, species, cattle, sheep, goats, anything, I think it's always good to kind of look at some general conditions. Excuse me. And so this is the one that, this hangs over our head in Oklahoma. Every year I've been back in Oklahoma for 20 years, and it seems like I've had a drought, been in part of a drought half the time. And that drought affects everybody in Oklahoma. And I'm going to show you, kind of talk about how it affects goats. I will make the statement that I do think goats and or sheep are a little more drought tolerant than cattle. I personally raise sheep and goats and going through the drought, and I don't seem to struggle as hard with the drought as what my cattle friends seem to struggle with as far as feeding and stuff like that. But when we look at this drought monitor, and this was last week's drought monitor, a new one will come out tomorrow. But the one thing you can pay attention and you notice on this thing, that is the widest drought monitor map I have seen. And I think I heard Dr. Darrell Peel do a talk yesterday, and I think he said it's the least droughtiest map we've seen in the United States since 2020. And so if you look in Oklahoma, I basically cover that. If you want to see this whole southeastern part of the state, we're completely drought free. Just got a little bit of drought up here in the Panhandle, a little western side, but them boys out in western Oklahoma stay in almost a perennial drought every year. But to them, that's not much. That's not too bad. But we're just, the drought. I'm not going to say the drought is over. We have a phrase here in Oklahoma. We're never more than 2 weeks away from one. And so, but we are seeing some of the best conditions that we have seen in several years. Less than 1% of the country is in that drought. and of course, y'all folks in Idaho and Utah and up there, y'all have got a little bit of drought up there as well. But again, it's not red, so it's really not a horrible drought. So drought conditions have kind of eased up on us now. If you believe what the meteorologists are telling us, that this summer it's going to be drier, so we could be back into drought. But what this tells us, though, and kind of what I'm going to get into next, is the pasture and hay production time frames that we get into, especially here in Oklahoma. And that's what this next slide is. This is total U.S. Hay production, and you can kind of see we had a really bad couple of years, and in 2023 we actually saw an increase in hay production. And again, from a livestock perspective, the way I look at it is that means that there's more hay out there, and that helps me when I go to purchase my hay, because I don't bale up a single bale of hay. My theory is I try to have my animals graze everything. And so I have to buy the hay that I need. And so anytime we can have ample supply, that means it doesn't cost me near as much. And when you look at this report, this is the May hay stocks report that the USDA does. And whether you believe USDA reports or not, etc., I'm not going to tell you they're 100% accurate, but they do give us a picture, and you can kind of just see this map, all the blue that's located on this map. If you'd seen the last 2 or 3 years, that map was never very, it was always on, pretty low in hay. And so what this is just kind of showing us, this is what the hay that we have left over after we've gone through our winter feeding periods. And you can look there in Oklahoma, we have 1.8 million tons of hay, left over. Texas, lots of hay left over. Kansas, there is nobody around us that is not, short on hay, or, got a little bit, New Mexico, and you go a little further west, and even look up y'all's way, Montana's got a lot of hay. Y'all got quite a bit of hay, and I looked at this total, and I went back and tried to see, and just for the data, and I only go back to 2010 on my chart that I have, but this is the highest hay stock total we've had since it's ever. I mean, I went back to 2010, and the closest we got was 1.5 million back in 2020. So we've got plenty of hay. As we start into the hay production season, most of my guys, my producers, are baling right now, or got some of it, their first cutting baled. And so as you look here, well, this map just shows you the percentage. We're 350% above where we were last year. And, and again, you look at this map, there's just hay everywhere, and which is good news, at least the way I look at it. Good news. Hay prices, need to move this little thing. It's right in my way. Yeah, there we go. So you look at hay prices, and 2023 we saw a reduction in hay prices. It's kind of my prediction. I think we'll see hay prices come back down and come down even lower in 2024. I don't know that they're going to get as cheap as they were, prior to 2020. That last kind of cheap year. Because input prices have gone up. Twine, fertilizer, and all this stuff have gone to shot up. Cost of equipment and this, that, and the other. It's going to come down, but I don't think it's going to get back down to where where it was really just dirt cheap. But I think it is going to come down and have us some cheap hay to buy for those of us who need to purchase our hay. We look at the corn prices. Corn prices again are below that 5-year average, way below last year. They're talking about $4 to $4.50 corn come harvest time in the Midwest here. And again, I am not in the corn producing area. I don't talk to corn producers at all. I know they actually don't like me because I want cheap corn, because that cheap corn helps my feed prices go down. And so you're looking at, with this lower corn prices going to be, cheaper feed. We look at soybean meal, again, cheaper than it was last year. Have seen a spike here lately, but again, still cheaper than kind of cheaper than it has been. So that helps us out. The one ingredient that we feed a lot of here in Oklahoma is DDGs. You may not get a lot of this up there in your part of the world, but we get a lot of this shipped in. And you can see here now it's approaching that $160 a ton. That's almost down half of what it was at the start of years in 2023. So again, cheap DDGs, that just causes and the ration that I feed is 60% DDG. So I keep an eye on this number because that keeps going down. That means that the next bin of feed that I buy is going to be a little cheaper. So I tell you all that just kind of put a premise on the fact. I think we're going to have ample hay supplies. I think the hay, if you have to buy hay, it's going to be cheaper. I think if you're going to buy feed, it's going to be cheaper. And so that helps. Anytime we can lower that input cost, and again, we're not going to go back to the way we was. I can think back. It wasn't that long ago that it was even cheaper. But I think this is going to help us lower our input costs. And when we go into the goat, raising these goats. And so now we're going to get into the goat side of thing. And again, when we talk about goats, the USDA, and you've probably already seen these charts, but the USDA only puts these charts out once a year. And so, I can only talk about them, for that once a year, but we're going to talk about goats, and USDA divides their goats up into 3 different categories, and we'll kind of discuss each one of them, but we're going to focus more on the meat goat side of things. And so, but let's show goats here real quick. And these are all goats, all 3 classes together. And what you're going to notice is when I go through these graphs, this picture and the meat goat picture are going to look very similar because the meat goat numbers are driving the total inventory of goats in the United States. And so this looks really a lot like the meat goat one we get to here in a minute. But you can see here, we peaked in 2008 right here with just a little over 3 million head of goats in the United States, have done, sharp drop off. And then we kind of hung around, bounce back and forth. I really, truly thought that we could maybe increase, and never did. And then we've just started going back down. And I usually show a chart that shows the annual average price for goats during this time frame. And the whole time the goats numbers were going down, the average goat price per pound was going up. And so the market was trying to tell us to buy more goats, or they wanted more goats, but we didn't respond, and we still haven't responded. And in the total goat herd, we're down 2% over 2023. When you look at goats, this is the Angora goats. Again, not a big factor. They're getting down close to only 100,000 head. That there haven't been a factor since the Angora goat program went away back in the 90s, but they're down. The one thing I could say about them is the smallest decrease they've had in the last 10 years. But again, not a big market. The dairy goat market, that was a little surprising. I feel like the dairy goat industry had a kind of revision in the late 2015 to 2020 with this farm to table movement, people wanting to know where their food was coming from. The thought that goat milk was more healthy, more nutritious than cow's milk. Cow's milk's pasteurized. Most of goat milk's not pasteurized. Wherever you want to fall in that belief and that argument, but I thought that was that helped spur the industry along a little bit, people wanting that demand getting a little higher. I think COVID did a number on it. People couldn't get out, people couldn't get their stuff to market, and it took them, it took them down several years. They stayed flat, but actually this year's the first year they've seen an increase in quite a while, and they're up about 1.2%, but still just barely over 400,000 head total. I'm not going to say there's another movement in the dairy goat industry, but again, it has kind of held along. I haven't done a dairy goat budget in a long time. The last time I did it, it didn't look very favorable, at least here in Oklahoma. We have to truck it too far to get it sold. We have to sell it in big metropolitan areas. The local people don't want to buy it as much. So let's get to the meat goat side of things. And this is probably what most of y'all want to listen to. And this is where I spend the majority of my time. Again, you look at this chart, looks the very same as that first chart we showed up. We peaked in 2008, and here you go. We just have never, since that peak, just a steady decline. We tried 2015. We raised them a little bit. It was short-lived. We tried again in 2020, short-lived. And you can see here, every year I do this talk or do these talks, I keep telling people with the prices that we were getting. And when I show you the prices that we were averaging back in 2020 and 2021 and 2022, I was like, why are we not expanding? Because it is very profitable, done right. It was a very profitable industry, but we just would not expand and stuff. And again, we saw another decrease this year, probably one of the bigger decreases we've seen in some time, and down 3%. But if you look, we're down 8% over the last 10 years. And this year's number, the 2024 number, is the lowest it's been since we started counting goats in 2003. And people always ask, well, what does this mean? What does this mean? I don't know I can't tell you what this means, other than that the goat industry is just not willing to grow. The ones that are in it, are I think the bigger ones are staying in it. I think the ones that are getting out are the smaller herds. They get in at this 40 to 50 head mark, they have a train wreck, and then they get out. And so because goats, and those of you who have goats probably will agree with me on this, goats are a learning curve. They're not small cows. It's what I thought when I got into this, and there's a learning curve. And so you get in, and it didn't take much to have a train wreck, parasites and that such a thing. And you have one train wreck and you're out, and you just get back out, and you don't get back into it. Here in Oklahoma, we see a lot of our goat producers are switching actually to hair sheep. The thought being there, hair sheep are a little bit, they don't bring the same dollar value as far as them, but they're a little cheaper, a little easier. Don't have the same, they have some of the same issues. Parasites is still an issue, but it doesn't seem to be as big an issue as with goats. So I have a lot of producers that either are doing both sheep and goats. That's me. I do hair sheep and I do goats at the same time. And I can that argument of hair sheep being easier, I will agree. There are certain things that hair sheep are very easy, and things I don't have to worry about with hair sheep that goats seem to be a little bit more problematic. But what I will argue is that if everything's equal, my goats will make me more money. But sometimes it's not always equal. But anyway, that's kind of where we're setting out with the inventory. And again, when the next thing I show this map of where all the goats are. And guys, don't look at, I hope I don't offend nobody, but up there in y'all's part of the world, y'all don't even register on the map as far as number of goats in the US. And you can kind of see the concentration of meat goats has always been in this eastern part of the United States, mainly focused in Texas. And Texas is the number one driver of meat goat production. When I first started doing these talks, 15 years ago, Texas had over 1 million head of meat goats. They're down to 700,000, but they've gone through quite a bit of, droughts and different things. And so it's not too surprising that they're down, but it's kind of surprising they never built back up, even when they get out of the drought situation. But you can kind of see here, Texas has always been number one, but the top 5 states, Missouri, Oklahoma, Tennessee, and California, we flip-flop. You can, we've, jumping down. So you can see there last year in 23, we were number 4. Now we're number 3. Missouri was number 5. Now they're number 2. Tennessee, when at one point in time, was number 2 for the longest time. They had over 100,000 head of goats. I worked in Tennessee. I'm still trying to figure out where they put those goats. I don't ever remember seeing any meat goats in Tennessee, but they've had a decline in the industry out there. They're now number 4. And then California, they jump in and out in the top. They go from top 2 to 5 all the time. And then you see these other states down here. Now I have some newer states getting into this top 10, Ohio and Kansas. Top thing, but they're all still small numbers. You can kind of see here, not very big numbers. Oklahoma has never got to more than 95,000 head of goats. So I mean, so it doesn't take much. And then but you can see what I always find is funny about this is we produce all the goats down in this part of the world, but we're not eating them. We're shipping them off to the East Coast, to the West Coast, maybe some on the southern part of Texas to be eaten. We're not eating them here. And so it's kind of funny that we raise them here, but we're not eating them here. When we look at the change in production, again, this is kind of odd. Oklahoma jumps from number 4 to number 3, and we actually had a decrease in the number of goats. But Texas has kind of had a decrease in number of goats over probably the last 5 or 6 years running. They've been down, and so again, that they're the one who drives the goat industry and the goat numbers, so to speak. So anytime they have a drop, that's what's going to cause the drop in goat numbers. But so that's that's kind of how things go. As far as goat numbers go and where they're located. The next chart, this chart, I like doing this chart. I started doing this chart probably 5 or 6 years ago. I was able to find the information where I can figure out how much goats we're importing. And when I say importing, we're not importing. This is not the cattle industry. We don't import live cattle into the, our live goats into the United States and then butcher them here. We're actually importing frozen goat carcasses, mainly from 3 countries: Australia, New Zealand, and Mexico. No other countries really give us any other significant numbers to even track. And Australia is the biggest one of those. So I started keeping track of this. I think I got numbers that go all the way back to the early 2000s and stuff. And it's really kind of an interesting story. And I got another chart after this that kind of shows what I'm talking about. But where the inventory numbers are, where the import numbers were when we first started, keeping track of goat numbers, to where they are now, and the change. And I don't want to ruin my next chart, but this chart, I found it very interesting because, of course, 2020, we had a bad year import number, but you can attribute that to COVID. Shipping lanes and stuff were all shut down and stuff. I think that had the major reason why imports were down that year. We bounced right back, and we typically average somewhere between 15,000 and 20,000 metric tons. It is kind of a wide range, but usually I always say we're somewhere over 15,000 metric tons. And we bounced back in a big way, but then bounced back even a bigger way. And 2022 was a record amount. It beat 2017 by just a little bit. And so we had record imports, and from Australia, and in kind of 2 really big years back to back. And then 2023 comes along and we're down 51%. That total is, we barely got 10,000 metric tons of goat meat. And so that's a significant decrease, and I don't have a reason why. Australia has things go on from time to time, wildfires, droughts, and different things. I have not been able to pinpoint any reason why Australia was down the much they were down. So what I'm a little concerned is about, if they didn't import that much in or export that much last year, what are they going to try to do this year? And then the last bar you see there is 2024, just January to April. The import data always lags a little behind real time. So it only January to April, and we're up 76% over what 2023 is. And if you look back, we're not quite at the same level of 2022, which was a record year, but we're right on pace of what 2021 was. And so if we stay at that pace, we're going to get somewhere back up there around that 18,000, 19,000 metric tons, and I think I took the slide out, and I'm sorry I did. Now, if you do the math calculations of how many goats, that almost translates into like 1.7 million head of goats, or 60% of our total inventory of meat goats in the United States, we're actually exporting in the form of frozen goat carcasses. But that's where we are right now. Australia's up. New Zealand's down a little bit, but again, New Zealand and Mexico aren't real players in this, but they do add to the total. And so Australia is the one we have to watch. And again, they're on pace to match 2021. This next chart, I thought.
Hey, real quick, JJ, you did have a question on that last slide.
Sure.
So someone was asking, and I think you kind of answered this towards the end, of all the goats that are imported, this is all meat goats, and they asked about breed type. Is this mainly Spanish boar? But you were talking mainly cuts of meat. Is it Australia mainly raising a boar type goat, or?
I'm fairly fairly certain they're Boer, Kiko meat type goats. They're not dairy goats or stuff like they're meat type goats. I would assume there's some type of Boer. Chad, that's on my bucket list to go to Australia, New Zealand and see what they're doing.
Yeah,
So,
me too.
yeah. So, but I don't know for 100% sure what type. I just know that they're meat goats, and they're not, I wouldn't think they're the Spanish type goats though. They might be more the Kiko and Boer type meat type goats. So,
Thanks. Thank you.
yeah. So this chart, what I started doing is I started just kind of charting, the kind of percent of inventory that we actually import in, and you kind of see, I went back to 2003, and you kind of see here we kind of hung around that 30%, a third of the goat meat, a third of our and I say inventory, live number of goats, is we were actually importing that total of kind of goat carcasses into the United States. And then what I find very interesting, and I wish, as an extension person, I don't get to do research, and I wish I had the time to do this. I wish I could do a little more research, some empirical research, to kind of maybe get the answers to this question. But you can kind of see there in 2008, that's when our meat goat inventories peaked. And after we started, we peaked and we started decreasing our goat herd. And also we started increasing our goat prices. As we started increasing our goat prices, we didn't increase the number of goats in the United States. We just increased the number of goats we were importing in, the carcasses. And so, and it just kept going up and up and up. And now we were hanging around that 60% mark, between 55 and 60% being brought in. COVID, 2021, that year we dropped back down to closer to the 30% mark, and the average price was $384, and then we came back with a vengeance. 2023 is back down that close to that 30%. If you're wanting me to guess, I'm gonna kind of guess that it's gonna rebound pretty close, and we're gonna be back up around this. Again, if we hit that 17,000 metric tons, we're gonna be back up here. But again, the price. This price couldn't buy more goats production in the United States. What it bought was more more goat meat being brought into the United States. So I find that kind of interesting that happened. So when we go to prices, let's talk a little bit about some prices here. And I know this chart's a little busy, but I wanted to leave the 2022 price in there because that 2022 and 2021 was our record year. That was the best year we had year to year total. We averaged $3.84 for the year. 2022, we saw that come down a little bit, about 20 cents. I wasn't too shocked. I really kind of thought that 2021 was and 2020 was a little overpriced, due to COVID, due to the things that were going on. I kind of expected prices to come back a little bit. They did. 2023, I was warning people. I said, okay, I wouldn't be a bit shocked if they come back a little bit more. Was it because, if you do the math and do a $3.50 a pound goat, live goat, that translates into some pretty expensive goat meat. And so, I was a little concerned that might start translating in, but I did not predict that big a drop. 2023, we dropped to 331. And so again, a little lower than what I kind of expected. You can see that green line. I thought we'd hover more along the average. I thought we'd be closer to that maybe 350 is where I was kind of predicting. And my predictions, my prediction is about as good as anybody else's. And I always tell people, my predictions or my price outlook are guaranteed until I sign off this webinar, and it's null and void. Because my guess is just that, it's a guess. And I have less information to work off of than the cattle guys and the hog guys do. Even the sheep guys have more information to work off of than I do. And so, but 2023 was not it. And I say that, I talk about the price and I'm kind of negatively, but really and truthfully, $3.31 a pound is not a bad price. And I'll show you a budget here in a minute that kind of proves my point. So really, we might complain about it, but it's not a bad price. And in 2024, we did a little, it's a little different, started out a little different this year. We did not, you typically we see higher prices in the spring, and really we didn't see it. They just kind of started out blah and just stayed flat, really. Didn't see that really upward price movement that we saw, nowhere close to that $4 a pound that we had seen the last 2 or 3 or 4 years during that time period. I know there's some anecdotal data. Well, I know San Angelo did sell some goats that were $4 a pound, but not on average. They were averaging pretty close to $350, $360 a pound for this 40 to 60 pound kid. And now we're starting to see them taper off. But I guess the good news is, if you want to look at it, that drop is not near as heavy or near as far as what we see in the past. And see that red line, that's the 5-year average. That's kind of your seasonal average. And we typically see a pretty good drop off start about, April, May. We haven't seen it yet. I think it's coming. I think we're going to see some prices drop as we go into the summertime. And I've got a little forecast here in a minute that'll show you. I think we're going to drop below $3 a pound, stay there for that low period, and then kind of come back up. So, Chad, you have a question?
Yeah, you got a couple questions coming in.
Okay.
So one person wants to know, how does the slaughterhouse availability affect the goat import and U.S. raised meat?
Well, slaughterhouse, it doesn't seem to affect it, because, to be honest with you, I used to show a chart that showed the where all the goats are being slaughtered at, and they're all being. Chad, I'll let you guess. Where do you think the #1 state for goat slaughter is? Just take a guess. One of the lower 48 states. I'll give you that much.
Man, I'll just put it right back in Texas if we're going to go numbers, but I don't know.
Texas doesn't even rank in the top 10 in slaughter.
Huh.
It's New Jersey.
New Jersey.
New
We had a
Jersey.
guess come in as in Michigan. That's not a bad guess either.
Yeah. So what that tells me is that goats are, raised in one part of the country and then shipped to the slaughterhouses with not much of an issue. And we can stuff a bunch of goats on a 20-foot stock trailer, and especially when you double deck them things, So I don't think that's affecting much. And then as far as the import, boy, I don't know. I'd hate to hazard a guess. And honestly, what I've been told from the folks that know a little more than I know, and these are my counterparts on the East Coast, they tell me the folks that want goat meat do not want frozen goat meat. They want fresh. So that's the one thing that's saving us is, but if they can't find it, they're going to buy it frozen. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I understand. We have a pretty strong pull of refugee groups in the Salt Lake area that demand a lot of goat, and I would say it's a similar thing there.
Yeah, they want, the way I understand it, they want it less than a week to 2 weeks killed, is what they know, and not frozen. And that's just, they're used to, we're used to, Chad, you and I grew up, we're used to eating ribeyes and steaks and hamburgers and stuff like that. They're used to just chunking meat off the bone and throw it in the pot. So it's a different culture, different menu, all kinds of things. So.
And the other comment that kind of came through that I think is just more clarification is, they asked about this 40 to 60 pounds, and they asked if that was carcass hanging weight, but that's live animal.
Live animal weight.
Okay.
Yeah. So here in Oklahoma and Texas, the slaughter weight for most of these goats is around 60 pounds. And so I always captured the 40 to 60 pound group, and then the 60 to 80 pounds. And then Texas, the reports that I use just recently in the last year and a half, started breaking them down into 10-pound groups. But my data set would be really small if I did that. So I still use this 20-pound weight group. So the two 40 to 60 pound live weight and 60 to 80 pound live weight are the two popular and where most goat producers aim for, as far as, unless we're trying to hit a special market. Okay. There are special markets, that want bigger goats. Some of the Hispanic markets want smaller goats, but this is the bulk, majority. So got to concentrate somewhere. So
Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah, this is live price, live weight. So anyway, this is kind of the 46, the 60 to 80 pounds, the next one. You can kind of look here on this deal. Again, 2021, good year, very good year. 2022, 20 cents below that, just like the other ones. And then a bigger drop for 2023. Again, didn't quite see that. I thought it would, hang around a little bit more, but now the good news is, and this is, and I don't have an answer to this, and this is also true in our hair sheep market going on right now. The heavier weights, the heavy, the 60 to 70 pound goats used to, the market here, at least the market that I was selling into, they wanted, their target weight was 50 to 60, 60 to 70 was okay. Anything over 70, they wanted to not dock you, but not pay you for them. And so now we're seeing a little resurgence in the 70 pound goats. The 80 pound goats are not getting docked. I don't know if that's just because lack of numbers or what, but there seem to do a little better as far as, it's not as flat this year. We actually saw a little bit of an increase, not as good, again, not as good as we've seen in 23 or 22, but still better. They were averaging, the lightweight group I showed you here, this lightweight group, they're around that 350 a pound. You can kind of see in this heavier weight group, which is typically about 20 cents a pound behind them, is actually 340s. So really, within 10 cents. And in some instances, the heavier weight goats are bringing the same money as the lighter weight goats. And so a little different this year, but again, I think this number is going to start to drop off this summertime and probably tail off below that $3 mark. And I'll show you again, I've got some forecasts here in a second that I'll show you, and that it's what I think they're going to happen to do. So anyway, this is kind of what's happening here. But I didn't say it earlier, but these are San Angelo, Texas. And the reason I use San Angelo, Texas and not Oklahoma is my Oklahoma markets are every other week. And so the data is not real fluid. And so the San Angelo market is a weekly market that has numbers in it every week. So, and when I do compare the two markets, there's not really much difference as far as price. Usually we're about 10 cents behind the San Angelo market, and we can't drive them to San Angelo for 10 cents a pound. So that's pretty close. So here's my predictions. And again, these are good until we hit end on this webinar, type thing. And you can kind of see the previous years there. I think in quarter number 2, which we're almost out of, we're going to average that 340 to 350 a pound mark, where we was just above almost 360. So down a little bit. This one right here might be a little off. But it might be a little more than 320 a pound average. Here's the core. So most of my producers here in Oklahoma, the production, if you looked, and if I backed up to that price chart, you could see, that rise in the spring and drop in the fall. And that's generally in Oklahoma. We kid out in the springtime, March, April time frame, and then we sell them in the fall. That's what fits our grass production. And so that's when the bulk of them come to market. So when we are in that third quarter, I think we're going to see prices hover $3 or a little under $3, depending on if you get the wrong month, get that low. That low month is probably going to be that 290, maybe a little under that. But I think we'll average somewhere between 290 and $3. The heavier weight ones, a little about 10 cents, 15 cents below that one. I think we will pick back up above $3 for the last quarter. And so if you want to hold on to them, and if you have the grass to graze them or the cheap feed to feed them, and it doesn't cost you to put a little more weight onto them, you might could hold them into that fourth quarter just a little bit. I do have some folks that do that, but be personally, my honest opinion on my goats deal is once I get them to selling weight, I want to get rid of them before they have an accident and die. So anyway, that's kind of my predictions for the goat market. The last slide that I kind of got, and then we can entertain questions, and we can talk about anything on goats you want to talk about. I like to put together a little budget using some, and I usually don't get into predicting the price. I just use a standard $3 a pound price, and we've been well above that the last several years. And a typical goat herd, 30 head, meat goats, 30 does is what I'm looking at. And I always tell producers anytime that I talk to them, when we talk about money, the key to making money in goats, the very big key to them is having that live goat to sell. And so it's kidding rate or, weaning percentage, whatever you want to call it. What percentage of goats compared to your mom herd do you have to sell? If you don't have that 150% kidding rate or selling rate, that's, to me, that's the break even point. Anything below that, you're taking a chance of losing money. So, but I like to look at the 150 to 180. I think 180 is attainable, but it takes, that's my goal every year is 180%. I don't reach it very often. I hover around that 165 to 170. This year is going to be even poorer than that. I've had a bad year. But anyway, I do this. I do a 10% death loss. I do a 20% replacement rate. So I'm not selling every doe that I have. So that's, on average, I sell, you can see there at $3 a pound, 55-pound sell weight's what I'm selling them at. Normally I sell about $250 per doe if I'm kidding out 180%, or somewhere between $200 and $245 per doe. That's my revenue. That's money I bring in. You can see my cost. I didn't readjust this budget to what I think feed prices and stuff are going to go to this year. It's a little too early for me to kind of do that. I'll do this again in October when I kind of do this, but this is kind of going off last year. So our total doe cost, again, it's different for the different kidding rates because you have more kids to market, more kids to do things with. But you can kind of see here, our average doe cost somewhere between $158 to $161. Fixed cost or fixed forever for all the choices there. And you kind of see here's my returns to labor, land, and management. I do not have any labor cost in this budget. Do not have any land cost or manage. So what I basically say, if you want to look at how much you're making, this is going to be your wage rate. And you can kind of see here, we're making about, we can make anywhere from $8 a head per doe to $50 per doe. I used to, before 2024 came along, I'd always compare that to cattle and make my cattle producers mad because it'd always show that my goat producers would make more money than them when you put it on a goat. It takes 5 goats to equal 1 cow. I mean, that's just 5 goats can eat the same amount that 1 cow can. When you put it on that total, we were making more money. Well, unfortunately, the cattle market's going nuts this year, and they're going to make more money for probably the next 2 or 3 years than my goat guys will. So I don't compare them anymore. And the cattle guys remind me of that as well. But I still think it's profitable. I still think the $3 a pound is still reasonable to even put in at. And I wouldn't have a problem with putting maybe $3.10 or $3.15 a pound in my own budget to predict for this next year. So with that, guys, that's basically all I have. I would like to tell you about, I'm going to do a shameless plug for my goat camp that we do down here in Oklahoma. And I know y'all are a long way away, but last year we had 3 or 4 people from Montana come to it. So, and I've had people from Washington and Oregon come to it. So y'all can make it this far south. We will let you come. It's a 3-day workshop that we do. We basically talk about all the areas of goat production that we can, as much as we can fit in 3 days. You see the slide there. We teach you how to do fecal egg counts. We teach you, if you've never banded a goat, we teach you that, teach you how to ear tag. We talk about pasture. We talk about feeding. We talk about everything. It's October 21st to the 23rd. It is in Ada, Oklahoma. If you Google it, we're about an hour and a half south of Oklahoma City, and registration's open. We limit it to 50 people. And so, my advice is if you're interested, I would go ahead and jump in there. We fill up about August 1. So, and with that, Chad, I'm done. I'm going to stop sharing my screen just so we can get pictures up here and see if we got any questions. I thought 45 minutes, Melinda. I was pretty close.
Yeah, you did great. Thank you so much for that presentation. That was awesome. I'm going to start with the question, or it's not a question, but Shailia, I probably butchered your name, but she said she was at your
Yeah.
goat camp last year, and it was fabulous. Highly recommend. So that was a good feedback on that one.
See,
So go ahead.
well, as I said, we feed them very well, so they can't go away too unhappy. So,
Well, there you go. Well, then I'm going to be there. I like to get fed well. So the second to last slide, one of the questions on that one was, why do you have your production cost for feed at $130 to $32 per head? Can you
because
give
that's
a
what
little
it,
on
I
that?
mean, yeah. So what it is I make the assumption that you're going to feed in the wintertime when you're feeding hay to supplement your hay to get it up to proper nutrient, protein and energy levels. And so here in Oklahoma, that roughly translates into about a pound of feed a day for a 150-pound goat. And my feed was costing me roughly $400 a ton. So you do a pound of feed a day. Now, how many days do you feed hay? There's $1 million question. I've got guys that are doing 90 days. I got guys that are doing 150 days. So I think I picked the middle 120 days. And then also I feed them a little heavier come right before they kid out, because that's the nutrition requirements are really the heaviest that last part of the pregnancy. And then I feed them while they're lactating for 90 days while they're lactating a little heavier. So we roughly got about 150 days of feed, and they're somewhere, it averages out pretty close to about a pound and a half a day per animal. So you do the math, $400 a ton, it comes up pretty close to 130 bucks.
Sure. And I'm sure that you'd be happy to help somebody if they were really interested
And
in knowing on their own operation.
so that, I tell people this is an average budget. This isn't even my budget. Okay. This is average. If you really want to get down to what it costs you, and I'm happy to help anybody, because I'm tickled when producers actually want to know what it costs to do things. And so, but you tell me your numbers, you tell me what you do, and we can figure it out. And then you can get your cost. Because again, a budget only works if it's your number. If it's my numbers, it doesn't work for you. And so that's what I tell people. And then we try to teach them in goat camp how to develop their own numbers. So
Awesome. So one of the questions is kind of going back to imports, and if you could discuss maybe what time of year the imports are coming in and if that's affecting goat prices at all. You may have touched on that a little bit, but
no, I tried to look at it a little bit, and I haven't dove into it again, because I'm not a researcher. I wish I was sometimes. And then other times I'm glad I'm not. I did look into it a little bit, and there really was no pattern to the imports coming in and coming out and prices. And so there might be a pattern there, and maybe I looked at this too small of a sample size. But I really didn't recognize one, and started it and then abandoned it and then haven't got back to it. So
okay.
Here's the deal. I do, if anybody, and I've told the guys who do the research, if they've got a graduate student that would like a research project, I have 2 or 3 research projects that'll be outstanding for graduate students to do, but I have nobody bite on it yet. So
Perfect. Well, we'll keep it in mind up here. The last question we have so far, and anybody who has any other questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A box because we'd be happy to get to them. But there is a question about different consumer groups and whether you have any ideas about consumption for goats and or lambs from different ethnic groups.
There is some data out there that shows for the different groups and things, but it's all kind of based on holidays. And I tried to follow the holiday thing a little bit, and to be honest with you, every holiday is enough different that it's really tough to especially there's a holidays that's in about, and the Muslim holidays move, so they're based on the lunar calendar. So that's what I don't like about trying to base my production on the ethnic holiday schedule, because that holiday schedule moves 2 weeks. When I first started doing these goat talks, Ramadan was in September. It is now in May. Okay, I cannot produce a 60-pound goat ready for May in Oklahoma. I just can't do it. I mean, if I do, it's held over from last year. And so, there is some data out there, but to be honest with you, that's another research project. And those ethnic groups are really hard to get a handle on, because if you're not from that ethnic group, they're not really straight or want to come forward with that information. But I was working with a guy, and there was one holiday, and try to, I don't know, y'all can figure, how do you produce for this? The holiday is the size of the animal you bought, sheep or goat, was determined by how rich you were. And the more money you had, the bigger animal you bought. And so, you know, there were some people that were wanting 200 and 300 pound animals. I'm like, those are our breeding animals. We can't really sell you our breeding animals, you know, that cuts our, and so, and they were wondering why they were having to pay $500 for something. I'm like, well, that's our breeding animal. So, you know, we have to buy it back. So, so it's really hard. So I always tell people, so here's the deal. And again, find the market you're going to sell into, ask that market what they want, and then produce for that market. So I'll use my story as an example, and you know, it's so I sell directly to a meat processor. He tells me he wants a 55-pound goat and a 65-pound lamb. That's what I bring him. He tells me he doesn't care if the lambs are docked but castrated, and he don't care if the goats are castrated. Now, I will tell you, I care if the goats are castrated if I'm gonna keep them much past 55 pounds, because then we have issues. But if I can get rid of them, you know, before they go into rut, I'm okay. But when they start riding everybody, they lose weight. So, anyways, but I always tell people, I said, figure out, don't be afraid to go ask. If you want to sell into the ethnic market, go ask those ethnic groups, you know, what do you want? Tell me what you want, when you want it, and then you try to make it fit. But now, don't try to fit a square peg in a round hole. If that doesn't fit your production schedule, you know, if you have to, you know, if it takes you a lot of feed because you don't have any grass, I'm a real big proponent of not feeding out of a feed bucket. But if you have to put a lot of feed into them, is it really worthwhile to meet that production, or, you know, meet that schedule when you can produce a cheaper animal doing it a different way? So people always get hung up on dollar per pound price. I get hung up on revenue per animal price.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Cost of production versus what you get out of them.
Yep.
So kind of on those same lines, then, what is your take on doing that direct marketing versus selling as a commodity?
So my take on it is that all really depends. And again, I'll kind of go to my story. What I learned in my deal is I love to talk to people, but I hate selling stuff. And so direct to consumer, you are now not a goat producer, you are a meat salesman. You are selling meat. And so I don't enjoy that part of the business. I like people. I don't mind talking to people. Obviously, if I didn't like people, I wouldn't work for Extension. But that marketing bone was taken out at some point in time. I'm just not very good at it. So I personally don't like it, but that's an opportunity, but you need to explore that and make sure it's not going to be the field of dreams. You're going to produce it and they're going to come find you. You got to go find them and then produce what they want. And that takes extra time. So I've got a good buddy in Alabama that does it with hair sheep. He can't raise enough sheep and, you know, and stuff, but he spends oodles and oodles of time at farmers markets selling this stuff. I'm a big college football fan, and so on fall and the Saturdays in the fall, I really don't want to be at a farmer's market. You know, I kind of want to watch football a little bit. And so, and when I had kids where we were gone every weekend doing something else, I really didn't have the time. So,
yeah, it's a lot of work to direct market. That is for sure.
It is a very viable market, and we've seen a real resurgence, especially on the beef side of things. But now I will tell you, make sure you know the rules and regulations of selling meat. You don't want to get that $10,000 USDA fine because you did it wrong. Yep. That's the one thing I'm concerned about. And I see it being done wrong on Facebook all the time.
Yeah. So there is a question about whether or not you consider pygmy goats to be profitable for meat sales, and I don't know if you've got an answer to that or not. But
there have been years I've seen pygmy goats sell for way too much money. I honestly don't know, because one, if that target weight's 55 pounds, that pygmy goat's pretty dang old before you get him to 55 pounds. So I don't know. I know my processor doesn't want them. They're not, it's too much hassle, too much trouble to work them. And so, but the pet market, you know, here's the thing is, it might be a viable pet market option, and then just sell the ones you don't sell as pets to the meat market. That's your secondary market. That's probably the way I would approach it. But I don't have enough knowledge about the pygmy goat things. And I usually make those folks mad when I start talking about them being pets versus meat goats. But if you read our meat goat manual, and under the chapter breeds of meat goat, they're listed. And they are little chunky suckers. So I don't know what the dressing percentage is on a big meat goat either. So
Yeah.
The few people I know that have marketed animals like that is more for meat. I'm thinking like Kinder goats or some of those smaller breeds is it was all direct marketing, farmers markets, kind of like you're saying. And you know, I don't know many that looked at it based on, you know, the market as a whole, you know, taking a price that way. And so I think if you're doing direct market and then you're also tapping into backyard dairy animals or pets or whatever you don't want to call them, I mean, that's probably a more viable way for some of those smaller breeds.
yeah, it's like I said, the pygmy goat thing, you know, that the niche market for them may be for those groups that want that small 25-pound goat to roast, you know, to put in the pit type deal, you know, or actually the Hispanics, that's kind of the size they look for because they cook it in the oven, the whole goat at one time. So it's, but I don't know. I would definitely do some exploring before I went out and bought a whole bunch of pygmy goats. Plus, I'm not sure my fences would hold them in. They barely hold the daggum goats that I have in now that are 150 pounds. So.
Well, hey, thanks so much for joining us. And I know for all of you participating, there's a couple of questions that are still outstanding, but we are trying to keep it to an hour today. So if you have questions that you feel like we didn't get to, please email me or Chad, and we'll make sure to get you connected. JJ, thanks so much for joining us. This was a great talk that you gave for us today, and I learned a lot. So we'll have you back again if you're willing. And
guys, anytime, and if you ever run into Scott Jensen, tell him, you know, just go ahead and kick him in the leg for me and tell JJ said hi. So
sure, you bet.
I know he's changed jobs now. He's now some big Western range specialist or something or another out there.
Yep, he's getting fancy. Yep. All right, very good. Well, have a great rest of your summer, and thank you all for joining us today, and we'll see you next month.
All right. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you.